Thank you very much. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Do I need to stand up?
Yes.
No. No, right, fine. Okay. It's great to see you. And I've enjoyed the fact that of all the Yes meetings I've been to, and it's beginning to mount up now, this has been the shortest journey ever, because I just came from Scotland Well. So thank you very much indeed for inviting me. Thank you. It's great there's such a good turnout, considering we're contending with the weather and the Commonwealth Games. And of course the arguments have started now. Is Scotland's medal tally going to make an impact on the yes vote? Can you hear me okay? Maybe. So yeah, is it going to make a difference to the yes vote? I don't get it. Because if you're undecided and you're watching the telly and you see the judo team notch up another gold, are you really at that point going to kind of leap off the sofa and say, that's it? I knew we could go it alone. I don't know where that's coming from. And the other thing is a sort of paranoia, and it even seems to be shared by Alex Salmond, about politicising the Commonwealth Games. Well, as far as I could see it, the opening ceremony was quite politicised, and the whole Commonwealth Games, by its very nature, is political. So it seems to me that you can politicise it as long as it's not for the yes vote. So you can have the red arrows with the red, white and blue smoke, yeah? But you can't have blue and white smoke. Of course, if I had my way, I'd have green smoke. But being a Scottish Green, I probably wouldn't be able to be in favour of the jet planes in the first place. So this all actually gets a bit complicated. Shall I get down to business? Why am I voting yes? Well, first and foremost, it's because I think we need to get the structures right. The way we're living isn't really working for an awful lot of people. We need to bring government closer to home. And that doesn't just mean all the powers to Holyrood, it means better local government, it means better, stronger community councils as well, as far as the Scottish Greens are concerned. And the facts speak for themselves. National government, what do they say at the moment? It's stale, pale and male, or whatever. But, you know, it doesn't... The cabinet we're looking at the moment, in spite of the reshuffle the other week, doesn't really speak to an awful lot of us here in Scotland. And it's 400 miles away, and 700 miles if you're a Shetland, and it doesn't seem particularly relevant. If you're a local councillor, are there any here tonight? Yay! If you're a local councillor, well, my hat's off to you, because it's an awful lot of hard work, an awful lot of travel, long hours for not much reward. That's not surprising. In Scotland, it's one of the worst ratios in the world for representation. So on average, you've got one councillor to 4,000 people. To put that in perspective, in Germany, it's 1 to 400. In France, it's 1 to 125, but then they also have village mayors and things, and I don't know how they afford all that. But you get my point. We are turned off from politics because actually politics seems remote and difficult and irrelevant and much too hard to get involved with, and, you know, what can we do about it all? So we need change. People are frightened of change. The undecideds are frightened of change, and that's understandable, except that change is inevitable. As an example I like to give, and at last I'm in a place that's going to understand it. Because in places like Dunblane and Strathpeffer and Bridgeton in Glasgow, it just takes a wee bit of explanation, and it's the massive change you get within a generation. So you can tell from my accent that I've got this knowledge second-hand. My husband, who's from Kelty, remembers when the smog was so bad and the great pit bings and everything, so bad of an evening that his mother would sometimes have to walk in front of the car with a torch in order for his father to see the way forward. Our children were brought up in Scotland Well, and they only know a sunny and pleasant land. So Lochore Meadows to them is not an old mine, old pit bings, it's a gorgeous park where they learn to surfboard in the summer holidays. So that's change within one generation, beyond all recognition in this part of the world. And of course the mining industry is away now. What I think about independence is it's an opportunity to embrace change, radical change, and I'm sure we're going to hear a bit more about that in a moment. But you know, it's the biggest chance we've got to change not just, you know, some political structures, but to change the way we live our lives. If we stick to the old ways, we're going to get the same old rubbish outcomes. We're going to get the same levels of inequality when it comes to pay, when it comes to work opportunities. We're going to get the same, speaking as a Green of course, exploitation of the environment and of our resources, as if it's all going to last forever. And yet we have the opposite at the moment. We're going in the opposite direction. Everything looks towards the economy of the southeast of England, and the keystone of that economy, which is of course the City of London, which continually exploits our resources, especially our Scottish resources, as if there's no tomorrow. So we have to embrace change. We don't need to be thinking anymore, wasting our time on how to prop up a broken financial system. We need to be more concerned about how to build a new economy with much greater resilience, much more diverse jobs, more secure jobs. We need to start over with that. But we can't do it simply under devolution. We don't control enough of the stuff that matters. Like farming. I know this isn't a massive farming area, but not far away down the road it is. If I had my way, we'd be growing far more food, cultivating far more food for home consumption and less for export. And we'd be building a more resilient environment. And the way it is at the moment is we have no direct voice in Europe. We don't speak for ourselves when it comes to negotiations. And of course, the DEFRA Secretary of State, who does speak for us, is vulnerable to a very powerful farming lobby down in England, where their needs are completely different to ours on the whole. It was quite scandalous at the end of last year, when Brussels actually recognised the historic underpayment of Scottish farmers and said, we're going to put that right. They were in the middle of reforms, we're going to put that right. So we're going to offer you guys £200 million a year over 6 or 7 years to set the record straight. So the UK DEFRA Secretary of State said, thank you very much, and divvied it up amongst the whole of the UK farmers. I think that says it all, really. Intensive farming has not helped our habitat or our other means of production like horticulture. So just up the road in Angus, they have to import bumblebees. I know, bumblebees from Europe, because we don't have enough native bumblebees in Scotland. The reason we don't have enough Scottish bumblebees is because of intensive farming. We've done away with the habitat, we've brought in too many pesticides, so on and so forth. A healthy environment isn't a good thing to have just because it's nice, it's because it's healthy. And if you knacker your own environment, then you become stupidly dependent on the rest of the world, as has happened. So just while we're talking about the land for a moment, we've had a limited amount of land reform, but I think it needs to go much further. As far as it's gone, it's affected remote communities, and there's a limited right to buy. The figures again speak for themselves. We have 19 million acres in Scotland. We have a population of, what, about 5.5 million. And 2/3 of the privately held rural land in Scotland is held by 1,200 people. So that's what, roughly about a quarter of the population of Cardenden own 2/3 of rural Scotland. And yet we're told by the people who own it, it's not about ownership, it's about the management. I think we could do a lot with better ownership. We have the biggest concentration of land ownership in the whole of Western Europe. Scottish Greens would like to see a land value tax to pay for public services. We think it would bring an end to the land banks, the likes of the Tesco's and the housing developers holding land until a democratic decision taken locally, maybe for a new road or something like that, suddenly makes it extremely valuable and then they can develop it. We think it would bring an end to the boom and bust in housing markets by giving a realistic value to land. And we also think it would begin the breakup of this, as I say, ridiculous concentration of land ownership here. How can it be right that we've got, as I say, 1,200 people owning vast acreages, and yet our kids are struggling to get the mortgages to buy even the smallest of homes? You know, something's broken here. So that's land. We'll just look offshore to fish, and again, we do not have a direct voice in Europe. We were sold down the river, if you don't mind me mixing my metaphors, right at the beginning when, as a condition of entry to the common market, Westminster gave away our 200-mile exclusive fishing zone. Now, our fishermen haven't always been squeaky clean when it's come to blackfish landings and so forth. But they do know a thing or two about the ecology, and I remember very distinctly, because I covered the story, when Denmark was given the rights to take in industrial quantities sand eels from the North Sea, from a fishing ground called the Wee Bankie. Do you remember those battles out there in the North Sea? I was there as a media observer watching the Greenpeace and the Danish trawlermen clash, and I sometimes got caught up in it quite scarily. The 5 fishermen said at the time that if they get to take all these sand eels, the haddock will go, because, and one day a fisherman opened the belly of a haddock and he showed me the sand eels inside. He said, it'll all be away, they'll have nothing to live on. And they were right, because we used to get our haddock off a Pittenweem van, and of course there's no haddock landed at Pittenweem any longer, it all comes down from Aberdeen. So what I'd like to see, ideally under independence, is our own voice in Europe, our own negotiations, and Scottish fishermen abiding by the rules under rather close scrutiny from Holyrood. We're going to be more dependent than ever on a food industry under independence. And food industry depends in turn on a clean and healthy environment. And again, we've made a mess of it. It's not entirely our fault. A lot of this rests at the door of the Ministry of Defence. So we've got problems, Dounreay, radioactive leaks there. We've got problems at Dalgety Bay, where disposing of luminous dials after the Second World War, they've managed to contaminate that whole shoreline with radioactive pollution. Not the MOD's fault, but the Solway Firth was also quite heavy radioactive pollution as a result of, I nearly said Windscale, but Sellafield, you know what I mean, the big nuclear reactor there. So we've got a lot of problems. The difficulty is that neither defence nor energy policy, in other words, everything to do with nuclear, none of these things are controlled within Scotland, and we can't fix these problems until they are. I mean, it was shocking that earlier in the year we learnt that the Ministry of Defence had deliberately concealed a radioactive leak from the Vulcan reactor at Dounreay from the Scottish Government. Never mind from the people, but from the Scottish Government. So what else are they concealing? What are they not telling us about Trident? A few months ago, the residents of Coulport were woken by deafening explosions, and of course there is a weapons store, a nuclear weapons store just there at Coulport. They were given no warning and no proper explanation as to what that was about. Trident remains not only a massive threat to human life, but the single biggest environmental threat to Scotland in the event of attack or accident. So it's all very scary, and we need total control over these things. Total control over energy. We have limited control in Scotland at the moment, but we can't exploit our massive renewable resources without having more control over them. We don't have the powers we need to borrow the money we need to put into these renewables, and the money that goes in spite of the headlines you hear, is a tiny fraction of the money that goes into developing gas and oil and nuclear. So we need that control. We also need to be able to develop local district heating and power systems so that we can end this dependency that we have on the big six, take some control over prices. In short, we need total economic independence. And that's where I differ from the SNP and some of the other parties, I think, in that I think we also need to move towards our own currency. Because although I'm no financial expert, God knows, I don't see how you can have two separate economies with different aspirations working to one currency. So I would definitely believe in a transition away from being dependent on the pound sterling.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So to finish up, can we afford it? Well, we know we can, and all the political leaders have really acknowledged that. The one figure I would quote is that we pay 9.9% of UK taxation, that's including North Sea oil, and we receive 9.3% in spending. Without the North Sea oil, and of course we would have it, we contribute 8.2%. We keep doing the same things. It's a bit like Einstein's theory of madness, which is someone who keeps doing the same thing but expecting continually a different outcome. We keep voting under the old system and expecting a different outcome. And I'm getting increasingly angry that for a lot of my time in Scotland, I've ended up with a government for which I didn't vote. And the fact is that for nearly half the post-war years, we have ended up with governments for which we didn't vote. Everything's going for us. We saw it in the opening of the Commonwealth Games to come back to that. Enormous confidence, wow, you know, and a phenomenal brand recognised the world over. There was maybe a bit too much tartan and shortbread, but you know, we don't have to reinvent ourselves, it's there already. And, in spite of what I said at the start, if our current winning streak does translate into a few more yes votes, well, hey, I'm all for it. Thank you.